And then suddenly this started playing, and I remember my jaw absolutely hitting the floor and messaging this person and going, is this what I think this is? And they were like, mm-hmm. Now, once again, this was a complete masterstroke by the team at the Palace. They kept this completely secret.
Hello and welcome to Acting Royal.
And today we'll be looking at clips of the late Queen Elizabeth II.
And see how realistic they were.
And I'm going to give my reaction. So here we go.
I doubt there is anyone who knows the British people more than I do, Mr. Blair, nor who has greater faith in their wisdom and judgment. And it is my belief that they will any moment reject this mood, which is being stirred up by the press, in favour of a period of restrained grief and sober private mourning.
This is well-trodden ground. This was all written by Peter Morgan, the man who would go on to write The Crown. Basically go on to spend the next 20-25 years doing nothing else except dramatise the late Queen, even though he said he thought she was a woman of limited intelligence and he wasn't very interested in her. Funny that. It just gets the Queen all wrong. I mean, you know, we don't know what happened precisely between her and Tony Blair in those phone calls this week, but what you see here is it's as though Queen Victoria is playing Elizabeth II. She's bristly, she's haughty, she doesn't like being told what to do. There's no nuance there, there's no warmth, it's just the Queen being very prickly. And that wasn't her way. I mean, during those weeks, Tony Blair was in touch, mainly actually. Downing Street would deal with the Duke of Edinburgh over what should happen next. But this idea that the monarchy was completely stuck in its ivory tower and had to be told what to do by Downing Street is just simply not the case. But I mean, you know, lots of people like that film. It went on to win an Oscar, but it was just the start of, I think, a lot of the artistic license that Peter Morgan would bring to bear on the Queen over the subsequent years.
This is portraying the Queen's anger, really, in the way that Tony Blair tried to manipulate her in the situation after the death of Princess Diana. He was basically sort of ordering her around, telling the Queen what to do, and she didn't enjoy that at all. She felt she knew what to do to protect her grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry, at their darkest hour.
Although this was actually before my time as a royal correspondent, I wasn't reporting on the royals at the time of Diana, Princess of Wales's death. I obviously know all of the people in the room. I'd met the Queen, Prince Philip, and actually Sir Robin Janvrin many times. And I remember one of my first functions as a royal correspondent was attending an event with Sir Robin, who was the Queen's private secretary at the time, and him being asked about this and saying he had never watched his portrayal on screen, although he heard it was quite sympathetic, and that he assured us the Queen had never seen the portrayal either. But I do know that Queen Elizabeth had quite a good sense of humour about these things, and she actually invited Dame Helen to a function at Buckingham Palace and made a point of speaking to her, so clearly no grudges were held.
Promise me one thing.
Of course, Your Majesty. Anything.
Promise me your silence. Were it known this terrible episode would shake the nation, you must never tell a soul what you did for your country.
Never, Mum. Not a soul. I promise.
My dear, loyal friend, I fear dark times lie ahead, and loyalties will be tested.
Now, this is Pennyworth, the prequel to the Batman films, in which we saw the butler played by Sir Michael Caine. And here he is as a young man, clearly receiving an honour from what appears to be Queen Elizabeth. I love the idea that she's sort of putting those conditions on him, saying, you know, I trust you with your silence and everything. I find it hard to imagine that that's the sort of thing she would say. I think almost she wouldn't need to. If she knows these people, she's worked with them for years. That comes with the territory. You don't need to sort of impress that on anyone. I love the way his voice sounds like Michael Caine as an older man.
There's a sort of minxiness to this Queen that I don't quite recognise. She was always very proud when she pinned the VC on anyone. She didn't do it very often because very few people win the Victoria Cross. There was one rather extraordinary episode, which I wrote about in one of my books, when she was pinning on one of the very few Victoria Crosses won in the Vietnam War. Britain wasn't in the Vietnam War, Australia was, and a wonderful man called Keith Payne, VC, who had rescued a load of young soldiers from a Viet Cong ambush and saved dozens of lives. Incredibly brave man. And he'd come to meet the Queen in the Royal Yacht when it sailed into Australia, and the Queen was there to give him his VC. Everyone's waiting in the drawing room in the Royal Yacht for this big moment. Just one problem: Keith Payne isn't there. And I spoke to the Queen's equerry at the time, who went running around the ship to find this man, because everyone was waiting for him to get the VC in a similar situation to the one in Pennyworth, except there would be a big audience. And Keith Payne, VC, was up on the top deck having a cigarette, and the equerry said, "Could you come down, please? Everyone's waiting for you. The Queen's waiting for you." And he said, "I've never been so frightened in all my life." And so here was a VC who was so terrified of receiving, he was quite happy to be shot at by the enemy, charge into an ambush, under fire, save people's lives, all that. The thing that scared him most was being presented in a room in front of lots of other people. So, these are dramatic moments. So I don't really blame the authors of this series for turning it into a bit of a scene, because these always were a bit of a scene.
Now, I'll be honest, I've never seen Pennyworth, but based from that clip, I think the actress does actually portray the Queen as a young woman pretty well, certainly in terms of the way she looks. And I think people forget how utterly beautiful Queen Elizabeth was as a young woman, because they have this image as her as this elderly matriarch. But she and Princess Margaret were really some of the leading lights of their day. And I think she's also got the tone very well, those very kind of nasal clip tone of the way she speaks. So all in all, I think I would say a pretty good job from this actress.
We have all been trying in our different ways to cope. It is not easy to express a sense of loss, since the initial shock is often succeeded by a mixture of other feelings: disbelief, incomprehension, anger, and concern for those who remain.
Now, I have to confess, I've watched very little of The Crown over the years, simply because I watched the first couple of episodes. Some of the inaccuracies drove me mad, so I decided I'm just not going to invest in this. A bit like a busman's holiday for me. But I have watched some of the later series because I needed to for work purposes, and I think she was as close as you would come, bar Helen Mirren, to capturing what the Queen was. And obviously this was a hugely difficult part in her reign, probably arguably one of the most difficult parts ever, the how the family coped and how she as a grandmother juggled her role as sovereign and as head of state and a public face of the royal family with her duties as a grandmother, and the strong emotion she felt and the need to protect her grandsons William and Harry at a very difficult time. And we all know how that played, but I know privately she always felt that she had done the right thing by her grandsons, and that was the most important piece of the jigsaw for her at that very, very difficult time.
Imelda Staunton here in The Crown, recreating that moment when Queen Elizabeth addressed the nation after the death of Princess Diana. You know, it was some days later, and pressure had been building for her to make a statement, because when Diana died, her sons were with the Queen in Scotland, and the family felt it would be best to keep them there, away from everything in London, to try to give them a calm environment. But pressure built, and eventually the Queen returned, and I think she and Prince Philip feared that they would be greeted by animosity, anger even, from the crowds. But in fact, when they went to inspect the flowers in front of Buckingham Palace, they were greeted very warmly. I remember after this broadcast, everything sort of seemed to calm down. It was like it was a sort of valve being released almost for the nation, that felt like, you know, the Queen was back with the people in London and everyone could sort of breathe a sigh of relief.
I mean, The Crown got many things wrong, but I think that particular moment is a fairly faithful reenactment of that extraordinary eve of the funeral. and Imelda Staunton. The actual words that she reads out there, they're not identical to the Queen's speech on the day, but everyone remembers that line about "I speak to you as your Queen and as a grandmother." I mean, that's in there. So yeah, I think that's pretty much as was.
This can be an opportunity to reflect on our own good fortune and on whether we have anything to offer by way of example to those who have recently broken free of dictatorship. We, who claim to be of the free world, should examine what we really mean by freedom and how we can help to ensure that once in place, it is there to stay.
I really like the dress you wore on television.
Wasn't the one my dresser recommended. They take a lot of photographs of you, don't they? The only portrait that really matters is the one they used to put on the £10 note. When they take that one, you understand who you are, my dear, as currency.
Well, that was Spencer, which I think is more notable for the actress Kirsten Stewart, who played Diana. I have to say it's not my favourite depiction of Queen Elizabeth. There's quite a lot wrong with it. It obviously is around a scene at Sandringham at Christmas. You have the family all together, you have the Queen watching her speech on television. Now that's something that never would have happened. In fact, the Queen, as the King has also done since, make a point of the minute at 3 o'clock that their Christmas message is going to come on, they leave the room. It would feel so strange to be watching it with the rest of the family. So they're not there, and my understanding is they don't even really discuss it either, apart from a few pleasantries. And it seems to portray a slightly kind of cold and slightly patronising relationship with Diana, and actually from what I hear, the opposite was true, that the Queen was actually very fond of her daughter-in-law. She was frustrated, of course, by some of her behaviour at the time, but she was very fond of her, and that the pair of them actually had an enduringly warm relationship.
That is a conversation between the Princess of Wales and the Queen in the film Spencer, which I never got around to watching, and having seen that clip, I don't think I'll bother. I mean, that's sort of classic schlocky, not very good dramatisation. It's meant to be Christmas. The family are watching someone who is obviously the Queen, doesn't look remotely like her, on telly. I think it's meant to be Sandringham. It's a fairly stereotypical depiction of sort of cold-hearted, glacial Queen against poor Diana. The cruel Windsors putting the free-spirited Lady Di in her place. I mean, I can see why that didn't win an Oscar.
This is not the most convincing portrayal of the Queen, I have to say. It's hard to recognise her here. But I think the idea of the film was to sort of, it was meant to be very atmospheric rather than realistic, and I think the least said about this one, the better.
Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here. For later.
I love that. Haven't seen it for a while. There's the Queen, there's Paddington, again, Queen in another great British institution. And that was the cameo role that led the crowd and led everyone watching on TV into the big Platinum Jubilee concert outside Buckingham Palace. But it's very sweet, I think, and it's the Queen. It's her. It's no, and she didn't. What was interesting about the scene was after she'd appeared in at the 2012 Olympics, people thought, well, how could she ever beat that? And in a way, I think she kind of did with the Paddington thing, because it's very endearing. It's she by this stage, she's 96. She's been on the throne 70 years. She's been on the throne longer than anyone. She's not very well. All through that year, she'd been experiencing what the palace called mobility issues. And so there was a bit of a worry about, how's she going to take part in her Platinum Jubilee. But this was a brilliant way of putting her right at the heart of it. And I know from talking to the people around her, she didn't need any great persuasion to do this. And she had to act because the Paddington character there would sort of be superimposed later through special effects. But that moment where she opens her handbag, I mean, what that does is go straight to the heart of one of the questions that the world has asked really for the previous 70 years, is what does the Queen keep in her handbag? I mean, I remember once going on a state visit to Italy with her, and one of the top Italian newspapers had put 2 reporters on the royal trail for the entire week, and their sole job was to find out what is in the Queen's handbag, and at the end of it all they could really conclude was, well, it contains a pair of glasses, a lipstick and a speech. Yeah, that was part of her. That is, there you have. That's the sort of the great appeal. I think that's one of her finest moments, really.
I remember being at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee concert, sitting in the Mall when this skit with Paddington was played. And once again, Buckingham Palace had played an absolute masterstroke. It had been a complete secret, as her Bond skit many years earlier had been. Nobody knew about it, not a single word had leaked out, apart from the fact that us journalists got a few seconds heads up before it came on so we could prepare our papers for the next day, but none of us had seen this. And the gasp that came up from the people seated there when it happened, my understanding, she was always known as One Take Liz in the television community, and she pretty much was one take on this, as my understanding was, but she was in a lot of pain, and I don't think we should underestimate that. And then I remember at the end, as she started tapping her teaspoon in the film, then the music started echoing out amongst them all, and it just set the scene on a most memorable evening. And obviously bear in mind, you know, barely 3 or 4 months later she passed away, and how much strength of character it showed that she did that.
I think it was a wonderful idea to pair Queen Elizabeth with another British icon, you could say, in Paddington Bear. I think in a way it's wonderful that we have this to remember Queen Elizabeth by in her final year. You know, it was just months before her death, in fact. We see her here clearly a frail old lady, but determined to have a laugh with the nation. And then we went into her beating out the distinctive opening rhythms of We Will Rock You by Queen, and the concert started. No, it was a real memorable, brilliant start to that night.
The Queen of Sheba. Daniel Craig.
Good evening,
She's come into the palace, and she turns, and it's her. Now that's the extraordinary moment. I mean, what you have to remember, this has been kept secret. This has been kept secret from everybody, including most of the royal family. And it's the opening night of the 2012 Olympics in London, in the stadium. I was there. I was covering it for the Daily Mail. I'd been to see I'd seen the rehearsal for this ceremony, and there'd been various moments that had been just blanked out. We didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea. So this really was a secret, and it had all been building up. And then after an hour or two into the ceremony, this video comes on the screen, and it really does. I mean, it was one of the best bits of kind of live TV, theatre, choreography, whatever you want to call it, I think I've ever seen, because it was just so brilliantly put together. And when the idea of doing this was put to her, actually she made up her mind very quickly and said, I remember talking to Seb Coe, who was putting the Olympics together, and he really didn't think there was much chance of the Queen agreeing to this, and he was very pleasantly surprised when the word came back, no, she'll do it. So it was all set up, and as you'll have seen, she only had one line, which she had to learn. Originally the line was, good evening James, and the Queen said, no, look, I'll do this, but I do want to change the script. And I thought, well, to what? And she said, well, I want to say good evening Mr. Bond, because that's what I would say. So it was No one's going to argue with that. So that's why she says, "Good evening, Mr. Bond." The original script said, "Good evening, James."
Now, once again, this was a complete masterstroke by the team at the Palace. They kept this completely secret. The only little clue we had was there was a comment in a diary column in one of the newspapers which said that Daniel Craig had been seen visiting Buckingham Palace, and we all kind of wondered, did they get that right? Or if it was, it might have been for some kind of private audience ahead of some honour he was getting or some gong. And we hadn't been given any clue that this was going to happen. I remember being told by somebody I knew at the Palace, they messaged me and said, "Are you watching the Olympics?" I'm like, well, yeah, I am watching the opening ceremony as well, because it was a big deal in 2012, it was in London. And then suddenly this started playing, and I remember my jaw absolutely hitting the floor and messaging this person and going, is this what I think this is? And they were like, mm-hmm. And then the skit went on, of course, at the end, we actually the film footage then transfers to live footage of somebody jumping out of a plane, and then the Queen walking in as they land into the stadium, and just the world erupting and showing what just an absolutely brilliant sense of humour she had. And I actually asked the person who was responsible for all of this afterwards, what was her reaction when you asked her? And they said, well, do you know what? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And her instant reaction was, yes, when do you want me to do it? I mean, she was so up for this, it was untrue.
This is brilliant. I mean, this must have been probably the most memorable start to an Olympics opening ceremony there's ever been. I remember watching this and you kind of thought, is this real? You know, we've had in James Bond films before, there's been some portrayals of real life people, such as I remember Margaret Thatcher in one of the films. But to have the Queen with James Bond here in this film, and then if you remember what happened, you know, in the stadium, then we had the helicopter and someone coming out, and people thinking, what on earth is going on here? Surely this is not the Queen. You know, and apparently even members of the royal family didn't know what was going on. They didn't know about it. Prince Charles at that time, Prince Harry, apparently it was news even to them. So, you know, it was a really great coup to do it and to keep it in such secrecy. But I'm not sure that will ever be bettered really as a start of an Olympic ceremony. Just brilliant. And I think this shows how the Queen, you know, was willing to have a laugh really, and to, you know, we've seen her appearing with Paddington, and this is with another British icon in James Bond. You know, she was aware of how she was perceived around the world, and I think she wanted to use that to the advantage of Britain for the 2012 Olympics, which was a great showcase for the country.
The interesting thing about that dress was they had to make 2 copies of that dress. Very first time ever, her dresser said, first time ever that they made 2 copies of the same dress, because one had to be worn by the Queen and the other had to be worn by the stuntman who's jumping out of the helicopter pretending to be the Queen in a parachute. And the other interesting thing about that dress is the colour. It's a sort of form of peach. And the reason it was chosen, according to her dresser, Angela Kelly, was very clever, because it was the Olympic opening ceremony and she wanted to wear a colour that was not in any country's flag, so that there could be no accusation of favouritism. So she wore sort of corally peach because apparently it's not in any flag, so there you are. So that was, I still think that's one of the great moments, and certainly the reaction where I was sitting in the press box, surrounded by all these journalists from all over the world, and as far as they were concerned, you know, that was the sort of the highlight of the evening. Actually, if you looked at the front pages on many papers around the world the next day, they didn't say, you know, Olympics open in London. They said Queen jumps out of helicopter with James Bond. Soft power.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed Acting Royal.
If you want to see more great royal videos like this,
remember to subscribe to the Daily Mail's Royal YouTube channel.